So, people sometimes speak about company founders in the US as if they are some type of demigods chewing glass and staring into the abyss. But there's a good argument to be made for the fact that European founders have it even more difficult. After all, in the US, people only have to worry about one regimes, but Europeans may need to navigate up to 27. And in a context of quite a bit of economic uncertainty, the European Commission is coming to the rescue with the 28 regime, meaning that if you want to engage in this startup journey, you want to set up a company, you'll just need €100. It will take 48 hours. It will be a lot easier to attract investors, and you'll be able to find it easier to reward your employees with stock options. But is this really the solution for European competitiveness woes, or is it just the start of a process that's taking things in the right direction? To discuss this, I am delighted to be joined today by Kevin Barrett, cabinet expert at Michael McGrath's cabinet, with Joachim Henkel for the European Commission for Research and Innovation, or the E-Commission for Research and Innovation, and chair for Technology and Innovation Management at the Technical University of Munich. We have Vasco Pereira de Silva, Head of Policy at Allied for Startups. And we have our very own Irene Larroy, partner at EY and EAIC board member. Kevin, I'm going to start with you. The Commission has certainly generated a lot of discussion with the release of its proposal. How have you found the response so far?
Hey, thanks very much, Paul, and thank you for the excellent introduction. You've set it up very well for me. The reaction has been very positive. So we've had a number of opportunities at political level and directly engaging with the startup and innovative community so far. I think there's a broad welcome, as is understandable in a case like this. There is points that various stakeholders are looking for clarification on, or points where they have identified where they would like to see changes as we go through the co-legislative process. But I think it is very important that we acknowledge, as you did in the opening, that this is something we've been waiting for a very long time. There's been previous attempts at creating a European private company in the past, which did not succeed. So what we're attempting to do on this occasion is to establish an optional European company framework, one coherent set of corporate rules. National regimes will still be fully in place. We're not we're in any way replacing or seeking to replace those, but this is an additional option for companies that want to use and operate across the European Union. And I think maybe just I'll make one further point before we bring in colleagues, and happy to take questions as we go along. This is the result of a very extensive process of consultation. Member states engaged in the high-level forum on justice for both. We had an extensive open public consultation last year, which was responded to by over 1,500 stakeholders. We've had a lot of technical meetings. So the output that the Commission produced in the middle of March as their proposal on EU Inc. is the result of extremely extensive engagement at technical level, at political level, and it represents our considered best opinion for what would make a meaningful difference to companies that want to establish, scale, and grow across the European Union. So the essential features of it, I think, will be seen as very attractive, as you mentioned, being able to set up within a maximum of 48 hours at a cost of €100. But I think one of the most defining features of it, which will make it attractive, is that it's digital throughout its life cycle. So I've been asked in a number of forums I've participated in why we think we can succeed on this occasion where we didn't in the past. I think digital is the great enabler, and the two other factors which I think very much work to our favor is, one, that the political backdrop is much more favorable on this occasion. In the past, it was political opposition at member state level, which resulted in proposals not succeeding. I think on this occasion, including the Council conclusions from the European Council recently, give us very strong hope that there will be a successful conclusion of the co-legislative process. But above all else, it's the economic imperative. We only just need to look at the statistics regarding the success of the European economy relative to our competitors, and we need to improve our competitiveness. This is not the sole solution to our competitiveness challenges, but it is a very significant contribution and will be seen alongside other initiatives which are already underway and some which are to come soon. So I think broadly, the reaction has been as we would have hoped for, which is very positive, but we have a lot of work to do in the year ahead with other stakeholders and co-legislators to successfully bring this to a conclusion.
Thank you, Kevin. I mean, I think the fact that this is a regulation is something that has been very well received. There's quite a bit of excitement and discussion, as I mentioned already, about this. But I'm wondering just about the expectations for it. Should we be looking at this as the start of a journey towards further single market reform rather than a destination point?
Absolutely. Because we published alongside the EUINC proposal a chapeau communication which set out a lot of additional detail as to other initiatives that are underway. So this is the company law proposal, which is the centerpiece of the 28th regime. But alongside that, we have measures in relation to digitalization. So the European business wallets will be progressed. That proposal was published last year. There are various other initiatives in relation to digitalization in the company law space, but also there are proposals in relation to taxation. There's already been the head office taxation proposal published, but there will be a taxation omnibus. And also we're looking at measures in relation to employment. There'll be a fair labour mobility package later in the year that will certainly, for companies that operate on a cross-border basis and where workers may be recruited, number of workers may be recruited on a teleworking basis, all of these will combine to assist in significantly improving the overall work in the overall competitive environment. So a very important core element of the 28th regime, but absolutely not the only element, and will be complemented by a range of other initiatives.
Yes, when you're talking about taxation, talking about labour reform, it gives me the impression that the real hard work in terms of the single market reform is still to come.
Well, this is a challenge in itself, so I'm not underestimating
Okay.
the expectations that we need to meet in relation to 28th regime. But you're correct. For just taking that example of the head office taxation proposal, if you have a company that operates in 3 member states and currently has to calculate its taxation liability in each of those, possibly with a different basis of calculation, so in relation to carry forward of losses or depreciation rules, this makes it difficult to be able to claim that we truly have a single market. We have a lot of work to do in that regard. The adoption of the head office taxation would be a huge contribution, as would a lot of other areas. So we've got to build this up from a strong base, and I think we've certainly this commission has made very good progress in 16 months already.
Thank you, Kevin. So I should say that for those of you who are joining online, well, we're all online, but for those who are in the audience, thanks for joining. Please don't be afraid to join the discussion. So there is a question and answer function here. There's a comment function. Please get right into it. And if you really want to speak, I think we can turn you into a panelist as well. Let's move on to some of our other panelists. Vasco, this is called the 28th regime. Do you think that is an accurate description?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me and Allied for Startups in this discussion. Well, that's quite a, I would say, philosophical question, right? Let's be honest, 28th regime and union law is meant to be something else, right? Something that would have been created under a different legal basis. What we have here, I mean, that's why we prefer the name EUINC, right? What we have is harmonization of company law. So what we'll have is that in each one of the 27 member states, we'll have this new company form. Of course, in a way, because it's optional when you incorporate, or if you're already existing company and you want to move and incorporate under this regime, in that sense, we could say it's a 28th regime. But if we do the maths, you'll see that in different member states, we'll have different company law firms. So this would be more than the 28th regime, right? But I would say this. But in any case, this is a very positive first step, and we are quite thankful for the work that the Commission has done so far on this proposal. Because as we all here in this call know, this is a serious proposal that acknowledges a structural problem that we have all known for years, because we have, of course, a single market in theory, but not really fully functional for startups and scale-ups, which is something that needed to be addressed. But also, as it was mentioned before, it's not meant to be a silver bullet, and we are conscious of that. This has to be seen in the broader package of measures that the Commission has announced on the 18th of March, but also previously in the EU Startup and Scale-up Strategy. So you have highlighted, Paul, very positively the fact that we have a regulation. This is also something that we asked for. All the dimensions related to the digital by default approach are very welcome: fast incorporation, flexible company structures, and of course progress that we see in stock options, which is also a very important element for startups. Now it's more of a question that where will we land at the end of this procedure, right? Because now it's for the Council and the Parliament to negotiate a proposal, and things could still change. And then one day when it's implemented, if founders and investors will use it. And that's really the question for us. I would just add two little things. There's two elements that were postponed and here Kevin knows that I'm not going to say anything new. It's expected there are at least two elements that we would have expected to be there. One is related, of course, to the issue on having a framework that serializes national systems when it comes to the registries, by using BRIS, where we had preferred European infrastructure. Of course, the Commission has already announced that they will be working on this EU register in long term. And then there's a lot of questions surrounding the dispute resolution, of course. We know being, of course, union law, it has to be interpreted by national courts, which are union courts. Then it's also a question whether member states will follow this recommendation by the European Commission in creating specialized chambers to deal with cases related to EU in companies. But overall, we have here a first set of rules that are quite positive. And so we will do our best during this process to support keeping all the ambition that is already there. And of course, if further ambition can be included by the Council and by the Parliament, we'll also support it, of course.
Vasco, you're asking the questions, will startup use it? I set up a company in Belgium. It took me 2 months, cost me more than €1,000. I trust my accountants, but I'm still surprised with some of the things in terms of how my company works. Surely, for €100, 48 hours, a clear and transparent structure, startups are going to jump at this opportunity.
Yeah, we don't doubt that, of course, but we should say that in Europe we don't have a big, startup problem. We have a scale-up problem, and that's here the big issue. We are still quite successful in creating early stage innovative companies in Europe. The issue is when it comes to the scaling phase. So we know that incorporation is one of the problems, of course, for many of these companies. But other problems will remain when it comes to barriers in the single market, and especially if we go to startups in highly regulated sectors, for example. So I don't doubt that if you compare to what exists in most member states, if I would be a founder, of course, I would also incorporate under EU Inc. It's going to be fast, it's going to be cheap. Then the question is when the scaling comes up, and if it will be such a system that is so trusted and easy to use that money will flow in and will avoid the situation that we have now with so many of our unicorns incorporating in the States. So I think the test will come a bit at a later stage, but I don't doubt that for startup creation that it seems like a great alternative to existing systems, and that would be interesting to explore. So I don't doubt it would be a success in that, at least for early stage companies.
Thank you, Vasco. Let's move to Joachim. And Joachim, I think I might have got your job description a bit incorrect when I introduced you, so I'm going to allow yourself to reintroduce yourself while answering my question. Surely, Joachim, this is all very positive and the fact that it's a regulation is creating some certainty around this. What's your response to the proposal, and do you have some suggestions already for how you think it could be improved?
Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you for the invitation. It's a great pleasure to be here, and it's a topic that is very dear to my heart to get things going, moving faster, better in Europe. Yeah, just brief correction. I'm a member of the Expert Commission of Research and Innovation, which advises the federal government in Germany, not the European Union, even though I'm more than happy to do this now and then as well. Right, certainty. Well, there are things to be clarified, obviously, right? It's a proposal, and many gaps will have to be filled through implementation and also in the legislation process. I think indeed is pretty good, and I would specifically like to address a few points of criticism that have been advanced against the proposal, even though many things have been applauded, as Kevin and Vasco already said. I don't want to repeat that. So one thing is there's no restriction, there's no access criterion as some have stipulated there should be. I think this is a wise choice because anyway, there would be disputes that would take time, it would require bureaucracy. And what do you do if a startup pivots and stops or starts fulfilling the criteria? There is such a criteria in the case of bankruptcy, but that's a different situation. There's less time pressure and there's no moving target anymore. So that's a good thing about the access. The thing about the common registry, yeah, that depends, I think, a lot on how this is being done, how these existing business registries, this interconnection system is being used. I think, but I'm not an expert on that. I just guess an advantage here definitely is it's cheaper and simpler to build on existing systems rather than build something new. Third point, lack of a central court for dispute resolution. Here I'm very skeptical, and Vasco, I would politely disagree with your criticism here. I actually just spoke with one of my former doctoral students who is a founder, I would say a successful one. And he, to my great sadness, moved his headquarters from Munich to Boston. One thing being this employee stock option taxation. So this is being fixed. This is great. I asked him about this thing about dispute resolution. Well, first, startups rarely do this. I mean, of course, they act in the shadow of court decisions, but it's rare, even for Delaware C Corporation, it's a rare thing to do, to go to court. Second, even within one country, there will be heterogeneity. I'm working a lot on patent matters, and the German district courts are rather heterogeneous when it comes to patent decisions, often enough. So there's no guarantee there. So if the EU Commission manages, or if the legislation process leads to a clearly defined definition of that EU Inc. thing, I think courts should be able to converge. And anyway, as I said, it's probably a relatively rare thing to happen. Startups often have mediation clauses and would refer to that, would try to avoid going to court if at all possible. So I don't think it's a really big issue in practice. And also, let's not forget, also within in the US, there is a large heterogeneity, for example, regarding labor law between the states. And anyway, this dispute resolution court would only address specific things specific to the EU Inc. thing. So many things about whatever contract breach would go to national courts anyway, to my understanding. I'm not a lawyer. So I think, and finally, coming back to the whole purpose of that thing, yes, we do have a scale-up problem, but we also have a startup problem. So it is, as also Paul said from his own experience, it is quite tedious to grow beyond national borders. May depend on a few factors, but also from my indirect second-hand experience, I can confirm that. And this difficulty of growing also affects profit and return expectations for investors, which then directly affect the scale-up thing. So, because if that gets more attractive from the start, scale-up should become easier. So I think this is interconnected, and overall, what needs to be done, of course, is that the self-selection of the firms one wants to have in there, that works well, and that there's abuse is minimized, that it's really clear, so courts decide consistently that it's not watered down in the legislative process, and its implementation goes fast and smooth. So overall, I'm very happy that we moved forward with that. And there are definitely important things in it. It's relatively lean. Let's do it. Thank you.
We need to get behind it. Yeah, I was interested in your reference to the discussion on dispute and resolution because there has been a lot of conversation about that and suggestions about something linked to a European court and so on. But are you saying that this discussion is a little bit overdone and that in fact there's a lot of uncertainty, ambiguity on this question anyway? And as you said, things won't necessarily go to court, and there will be differences anyway at national level.
I'm essentially saying that, yes. I mean, it would require maybe some more empirical research than speaking with one founder.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's also my experience from other cases. As I said, we have a unified patent court in Europe, and as I said, I'm working quite a bit in this field.
Yeah.
I've also worked a bit on the SEP regulation, which was pulled a while ago. So I think there it is useful to have that, but it took ages to build one. So again, here's also the bureaucracy argument. To build an additional new institution takes time. My hunch would be, but this preliminary, my hunch would be it's not such a big issue that would keep founders from using it.
Kevin, I saw your hand go up. Do you want to come in on that?
You just make one very quick point on it. So as well as the recommendation to member states to that they would designate or establish a specific division of their court to handle cases related to EU Week. We're also doing a lot horizontally to improve the administration of justice. So a very important aspect is the European Judicial Training Strategy published last year. It's essential that our judges in every member state are up to speed on all aspects of relevant law, and including EU Week when it hopefully does become law. And also the digitalization of justice agenda. The way in which our courts are administered across the Union is, I think, improving. We track it every year with the Justice Scoreboard. And ultimately what founders or stakeholders invested in an EU company or doing business with an EU company want to know is that a case, if it arises, can be resolved quickly and at a reasonable cost and in a consistent manner. And the work we are doing is designed to ensure that is very much the case, and that we are demonstrating improvements. So, but we have heard the concerns of the startup community. That's why we specifically put in a provision that we recommend member states to designate a division of their court. But alongside, we're also doing a number of things which we think will have a general impact and improve how such cases are administered and delivered.
Now, and so are you saying then that with these type of measures that this type of issue won't need to be addressed in a more fundamental way through some European juridical structure? Or is this the case of we just need to get started and eventually we might go in that direction?
Well, it would require, my understanding is treaty change, and that is a very significant hurdle to jump. So in the preparation of any proposal, what is realistically deliverable now has to be to the forefront of our mind. And I would agree with Joachim, this is, in substance, we've all of the important things, I think, included in this proposal. There are things that would be, in an ideal world, nice to do also, but they won't be done in this proposal. And I can't predict the future as to whether it might come around again at some point. But I think what we're doing now is the absolute maximum we can do within the constraints we operate under.
Okay, Vasco, Irene, I'm going to come to you in a moment, but just quickly to close this one off, Vasco, no big deal on dispute resolution. Would you like to respond?
Well, I'm not going to say that I disagree with what Joachim or Kevin said. It's something to be seen. I think it's more of a comparison expectation with what founders are seeing in other jurisdictions, right? And of course, in that sense, for example, Delaware is not comparable with the EU because we're comparing two very different realities of a state within the United States and what we'll have with EU Inc. in the 27 member states. I think the major issue when it comes to courts, and I think Kevin sort of addressed that, is how quickly the cases will be solved, right? And the cost associated to it, because that's on national law, and we have completely different dispute resolution systems at the national level. And of course, the expectation, if you're a founder and you're a founder, let's say in Spain, is that for a similar court case treated in Spain, you want to have the same experience as a user, let's say, as someone in Germany. So I think it's fair that there is this questioning. When it comes to the interpretation in itself, maybe not in the beginning, but I mean, that's how we've all built the union, right? So we expect the Court of Justice to interpret the case at a certain point and create case law, and then the situation will be treated similarly. I mean, there's a positive element here, even though it's only for EAIC, because probably EAIC will force member states to look into their judicial systems and create improvements, which we know is something that has been widely discussed in the union for decades now, right? And especially for companies. So, this is also an opportunity for member states to create better resolution systems at the national level with faster procedures and reducing costs for companies. But indeed, I think it's more on the logic of the experience and how long will get us to get there, right? And it would be, of course, unfair to see founder in one member state having a completely different experience in front of a court when it comes to time and costs, and others thinking that this is the same type of company, right, by the end of the day. But again, it's something that we'll only see in practice once this proposal is being implemented, and the courts will have to use it. And I also agree with Joachim in one aspect. Of course, we're talking about sort of a small body of law, right? It's this regulation to be interpreted. Many other things are not there. So how many times will companies go to court because of interpretation of articles of this regulation? Also, that will depend how the legislative procedure ends, right? If everything is very clear, then probably they will not need to court that often indeed. And many other aspects, as you know, that are not addressed here are still for the national courts to be addressed. But that would be the case also, for example, in the States in different areas, right? When it comes to tax or labor. So there I don't disagree. It's more going to see what's going to be the user experience in the long run.
Thank you, Vasco. Irene, as a consultant, would you advise your clients to set up a company within the 28 regime?
I will tell them to wait at least, let's say 6 months after it's really operative, to see what happened to the companies that went first. This is a quite conservative approach, but there are so many questions that practically we need to see how they are resolved. First, let me start with the positive points that I see of this 20 EAIC. First, the fact that it's a regulation. You mentioned that, Paul, but I think the level of discussions are really expert here. So I want to remind our listeners what does it mean, the fact that it's a regulation. It means that it doesn't need to be unanimously approved by all the member states, and that there will need no transpositions to national laws. So it's a regulation, it's approved at a European level, majority, and we don't need to transpose it to each national law. That per se is a terrible mistake. Sorry, a terrible success, I wanted to say. That's a terrible success. Not doing that would have been a mistake, sorry. Okay. Another good thing that I think has not been highlighted enough is the proposal for definitions about the innovative enterprise, innovative startup, and innovative scale-up. The existence of these definitions, if used correctly later, can be the start of a change in many aspects. For example, in innovation grants. We have innovation grants in which everyone can apply and there is no actual distinction. And I'm talking just at European level, but the same if we talk at national levels, or even worse, each country makes a definition of what is an innovative SME. For example, if you look at the Eurostars program, in each of the countries, Eurostar has different definition of who can apply and what does it take to be considered an innovative SME in that particular country. So if these definitions are widely approved, that are also a super great step of this. What I like the most, the once only, but I'm a bit skeptical also. I have seen the president of the commission, Ursula von der Leyen, saying, once only, you just submit your information once in EAIC. By the way, the domain is not free. Someone has taken the domain EU Inc., so possibly it will be another domain, but you just do all your paperwork in EU Inc., and it will be this platform that is in charge to give your data to your national tax agency, to your social security, and in cases like in Spain, to your region, because we also have some regional obligations and bodies. If this is true, I mean, where do I need to sign? I sign immediately. That's a massive advantage. But some of the member states governments have been trying for years to establish systems that allow this flow of information between agencies and territories, and they have failed. So I'm really wondering how, in practical terms, this will be done. If I create a company in EU Inc. in 48 hours, but I still don't get my VAT number from Spain, I cannot issue the invoice for the service I am doing. I want to know how many days since I incorporate the company until I issue the invoice. Or I can invoice without VAT if I am invoicing to another country of the European Union, because right now you're required to register, in my case, in Spain, then you get the NIF, which is the Spanish VAT, then you have to apply for the European VAT, which is not a straightforward procedure, and then you can issue your invoice. That's from the point of view of the founders, the immediateness. And if this is done, that will be a massive step. From the point of view of the employees, I'm not a founder. I am someone maybe living in the States, and I get a job offer of one of these companies in Europe. I am offered stock options, because you all mentioned the stock options as a very positive moment. And for me, this is the biggest advance of this regulation, the stock options. Why? Because they defer the moment in which an employee will pay for the value of these stock options. The employee will only pay when they execute the right and really acquire the stock options. That's massive. However, there will still be differences. It won't be the same. If I am a person from the United States looking at Europe, possibly the conditions are not going to be the same in Spain, that in Estonia, that in Germany. So I still would need to understand what will be the taxation of these stock options in the future, not only the stock options, my salary, everything. So, and I think this is a very good step towards a future common ground for European companies, but still needs to be developed. And I'm super curious to hear more about the taxation omnibus, because at the end, everything depends on tax. That's something I learned at EY. Everything depends on tax. Many of the decisions of the companies, especially in terms of geographical presence, depends on tax. So how is this going to evolve? Because, for example, when we look at the last summer position papers about the European new budget, the multi-annual financial framework, there is mention to some taxes, the core tax, for example, that is being discussed, and nobody knows really if this will be a reality or not, because tax are responsibility of the member states, but at the same time, the European Commission proposes this core tax and counts with it, with 6 billion euros of money to contribute to the budgets. And we all know that the budgets of the multi-annual framework financial framework are not small. So if we are not able to agree on taxation for startups, how are we going to deal with taxation for all companies? That are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene. There's a lot to unpack there. And we have one comment from Russell. The interoperability efforts are managing these concerns. I don't know if they're managing all of them. Maybe we start, Kevin, with the first question just about, for instance, VAT. So I get signed up with EU Inc., but then I'm dependent from national level to actually get the VAT number and start doing business. Is this how it's going to be?
Yeah, so the once only principle applies to 3 areas. So the tax identification number, the VAT number, and then also the provision of the relevant information to social security authorities. So the intention is that when you complete your application form and submit it, and maybe just to take one of Irene's points, we're not using the EU Inc. domain. It's the there'll be a central interface for registration of companies, which will sit on the eJustice portal. So if somebody else has claimed EU Inc. as a domain, that's nothing to do with it's not a it's not a the registration will be on the existing will be on a dedicated page on the existing eJustice portal. So when a company submits its application, that information then goes to the national authorities in each of those areas. We can't prescribe to the national authorities how quickly that they then return to the company with the VAT number and the tax identification number and so on. But again, and not to maybe overemphasize the point of competition between member states for EU Inc. companies, which have a free choice of where they register, but countries will clearly want to be able to demonstrate that once the company is registered, that the bits that come next, which include obviously tax and VAT, are done in as seamless a manner as possible. And I know that in some member states that is obviously considerably quicker currently than it is in other member states. So what we're trying to do is give effect to that once only principle, have a seamless application process. The information goes off in the different directions that it needs to go, but then that the use of that information by the national authorities obviously is decided at national level in terms of how quickly their processes work. But one would hope that they would seek to do that as quickly as possible.
Okay, and then Kevin, on stock options, my understanding was that the approach proposed is that there will be a harmonized approach with respect to taxation on stock options, and that's really one of the huge advantages here.
It is, but important to note this is on the timing of the taxation, yes. And Irene referred to this. And we are constrained, Irene referred to it being a regulation, specifically as a regulation under Article 114, which provides for QMV, qualified majority voting, which certainly is an advantage because observing discussions at Council, the prospect of a unanimous adoption, notwithstanding the broad support for it, is unlikely. So, or is less likely. So that we are bringing this forward under 114, which provides for qualified majority voting, is advantageous to getting it done in a reasonable period of time. But there's a very specific aspect which needs to be borne in mind. Article 114, paragraph 2, specifically precludes fiscal measures. And the reason we were able to include harmonization of the timing of taxation is that it is considered ancillary to the main proposal. In other words, it is essential to the adoption of the overall intent of the proposal. Were we to also propose that the form of tax, whether that be capital gains tax or income tax, be harmonized as well, it would be arguably not possible to do this under Article 114. We would have gone into Article 115, which requires unanimity. So that is why in the chapeau communication, which accompanies the proposal, we strongly suggest or encourage member states to harmonise the form of taxation. And again, this is something that will be part of their own decision, but clearly the harmonising of the time of taxation is what we can deliver within the proposal. And I think it's very important also that this element is available to all EU Inc. companies. In the course of the discussions, you may have seen various suggestions that certain elements would be limited to the definitions, and the definitions are very important and useful for many areas. But I think on the taxation aspect itself, if that was limited only to a subset of companies, it would have a significant dilution effect on its impact, because companies need to recruit talent at all different stages in their life cycle as they mature and maybe no longer fit the definition as set out of being a startup or scale up. They still need the instruments that help them recruit talent, and that's why we have gone for making that in the proposal available to all companies.
But the timing issue is big, because as I understand it now, in certain countries now, you can get taxed on stock options before they really generate their real value, or they really
you end up with a dry taxation charge. You have a liability discharge, but you don't have cash because you haven't sold the shares. It could be from the point where the shares, the option was granted or vested or exercised. So there's essentially 4 points in time at which this could apply, and we've pushed it out to the furthest point. But for member states, in essence, this is a timing issue in the revenue. Other than circumstance where somebody moves tax residency, from the member state, and they then lose the associated tax inflow, it is ultimately a timing issue rather than a potential loss of revenue issue. Whereas if we were to say harmonize it as capital gains tax, we did some work on this. We looked at the different rates. There's quite a significant difference in rates between the typically applicable capital gains tax rate and the marginal tax rate, which often includes payroll or social security taxes. So I think we've pushed this as far as we can within the constraints of Article 114.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Kevin. Joachim.
A tiny addition on this point, underlining the importance. The founder I just mentioned, who has by now raised some 12 million or so capital, for him, the primary reason to move his headquarters to the United States was precisely that, the dry income taxation of stock options. And that's obviously an issue, right? You get less cash as an employee, but you have to pay taxes from that
exactly.
amount, small amount of cash for those options that you receive. It's really an obstacle, and it's good. It would be great to overcome it.
Yeah,
Okay,
it is
fantastic.
a great problem because the employee feels I am already working for less, and I get stock options, and the way the value is fixed, and I have to pay for taxes before I really acquire the stock options, and that's complex. But the thing is that this was or is an unfair regime. What the 28th regime or EAIC is doing is to force the member states to correct something that was not fair. So if this can be done in the moment of taxation of stock options, I am sure there are other opportunities in which we face, let's say, small injustices from the point of view of, in this case, of the founders or the employees. I would also like to ask Kevin about, in practical terms, how investors are going to see the EU Inc. companies more attractive to invest in than the traditional member states incorporated. Because I think EU Inc. tries to cover both sides, the founder, but also the investors that may come from China, from the States, from whatever. How is this going to be reflected in real life, Kevin?
I think this is actually one of the most important selling points of EU Inc. And it's each of the elements of EU Inc. that we would talk about, the digital, the fast incorporation, fully digital governance structure, the employee stock options, which we haven't mentioned previously, but the requirement, or there isn't a requirement for mandatory use of intermediaries for capital transactions. Each one is incrementally adding to the overall attractiveness of EU Inc. But I think from an investor point of view, probably the number one attractiveness, I would say, is that it is the same in all 27 member states. And one of our problems with the depth of the venture capital market in Europe is it tends to be very localized in its focus. And investors who look at companies say that is operating under a particular company national legal form. And I understand that, but I don't understand other companies that operate under different national legal forms, and I'm not going to expend a whole lot of effort in trying to, notwithstanding how good those investment opportunities may be. So I think one of the things from the investor point of view is that once you get your head around EU Inc., and we think that will be, hopefully relatively quickly, because the regulation, as has been commented to me, is written in very, it's comprehensive, but it's also written in quite accessible language. Is very clear in what we're trying to do. I think both within the European market, and there's a lot of household private savings in Europe, which even a very, very small increase in the allocation of those to venture capital would be extremely impactful. But then from third country investors also, once they understand it, it is the same in every member state. So I think that will add to its attractiveness. So hopefully we should see, I think, what is in that sense an intangible benefit from EU Inc. Over and above the very quantifiable benefits which occur at each stage along the way, and which, if anyone has time to look at the impact assessment at any stage, are set out in good detail as to what are the savings, what are the benefits from each of the features.
And Kevin, I saw you answered in the chat there that switching your company to an EU Inc. company will be as easy as starting.
Yeah, and in principle, we expect most companies to start from scratch. So we've set out some numbers that about 90% of companies will be set up by natural persons from scratch. A certain proportion will be existing companies who, under a national legal form, will use EU Inc. for a subsidiary. and then other companies will convert either domestically or by means of a cross-border conversion or merger in some cases. So it will, the same rules apply in terms of the time and cost. Clearly, a long-established company will have maybe less obvious reason to convert, because they will have a degree of familiarity with their structures and their governance, but that will be possible. And we expect around 10% of companies formerly EU Inc. to come through those various routes.
Kevin, maybe I'm getting caught up in the excitement of this, but I'm certainly ready to switch. Joachim.
I would like to add a quick point regarding the legislative process that ensues. As I had mentioned in this year's report of the EFI Commission, we have a chapter on the 20th regime, and among other things, we recommend, well, rather than not having it or having a rather weak version, we recommend enhanced cooperation. Because it just can't be that the EU is always waiting for the least willing party to join. So I was wondering, as partly a question to Kevin, is this something in the background to say, hey, dear Councillor, dear Member States, if you can't agree on something, if you want to water it down, at some point we discuss, or some members will discuss, enhanced cooperation as an alternative? Or is this something that would just emerge from some Member States or multilaterally?
I think such is the immediate reaction of the European Council leaders, which coincidentally, a happy coincidence, was the day after the proposal was published, and very strong encouragement. And then separately, what we've heard from member states as they've expressed at Coreper would indicate, obviously, enhanced cooperation is always a possibility, but I genuinely expect that we will be able to reach agreement, and it will be an agreement which upholds the ambition of the proposal. So, a theoretical possibility, but I would put it as very unlikely.
It's more like in the shadow of that option. Hopefully, they reach a good agreement.
It is always on the table for sure,
in
the background. But genuinely, that's not how I expect it to pan out.
And overall, are you expecting this thing to go through easily now? It seems like member states are giving up a little bit, even if that dry taxation thing is just a timing issue. I mean, timing counts. When you get the money counts as well. How confident are you that there won't be huge changes in the next couple of months?
Well, I mean, there will be very intense discussions. The first Council Working Party has already taken place, and that was encouraging. There will be discussions around issues like the insolvency proposal, which envisages, as well as a digitalization of the insolvency process, but also envisages a simplified insolvency process for innovative startups, which is a defined subsection of the overall population of companies, using the definitions that were published alongside the EU Inc. proposal. And member states could, I suppose, credibly say, we've just had a very intensive process in relation to insolvency, and during that was chosen not to include a simplified procedure for micro enterprises. Now, the definitions are not identical here, but arguably they would say we dealt with that issue. And we would argue, counter argument is that, well, we're starting with a new sheet of paper here with EU Inc. and specifically for the purpose of reducing the cost of failure is the motivation that we envisage a simplified process. And that'll be a discussion that will obviously play out in the months ahead. Similarly, the role of intermediaries. In some countries, that's a very well established process. In other countries, preventive checks are administrative or judicial in nature. We still provide for the role of notaries as in accordance with the preventive checks that member states have, but it is within the time constraints and cost limits for setting up a company, and then separately for capital transactions, so share transfers and so on. We provide that there would not be the mandatory use of intermediaries, and in those countries where that is part of the established tradition, member states may argue that this is a something that should be mandatory. But these are the arguments that will play out in the months ahead, and I anticipate that it will be very intense discussion. But the timeline is certainly. I believe the Irish presidency in the second half of the year are very anxious to take this forward, and with a good with the fair wind behind us, we might get the conclusion. We'd like to get concluded by the end of the year.
Okay, very good. We have a couple of questions in the question and answer function, so thanks for those. And we have 10 minutes to go, so if there are more questions, now is the time to get an answer to them. Is there any estimation or objectives about the number of companies that would choose this regime, let's say 1 year after launching?
Yes, over 10 years, we're expecting that in year 10, 10% of companies formed in the EU will be using the EU Inc. form. So it's about 660,000 companies currently. So it will be 66,000 companies in year 10, but that is a gradual glide path to that. So it's relatively modest in terms of the assumption. In year 1, I think it's actually 0.25% of companies, and that may reflect Irene's comments earlier that there'll be a wait and see. But I personally think there'll be a first mover advantage. I think it will be, as well as EU Inc. being a brand from the point of view of understanding what the current form is all about. I think there may be a first mover advantage in just being able to say, I am an EU Inc. when you go out and do business. But we envisage that at the end of 10 years, there will be about 310,000 EU Inc. companies, and it will be 10% of new registrations by year 10.
This sounds like that. When I was working in sales, I would always try to underestimate results so that I'd be seen to do well at the end. And Mark Downey, I'm kind of with him here. Why not 10% in year 10? I mean, what's the advantage of not using EU Inc.?
Well, indeed, it could. I'd be very happy to see that the numbers are exceeded, but that's what we, based on some our technical analysis and a quantitative assessment. That's how we see it evolving.
Okay, very good. Just some other questions here from Monica. Legal frameworks for the creation of European entities have existed for many years. So what's the difference here, and how can you guarantee that this new setting will work?
I think that's a reference to EU-wide entities, so the SE, as Europe. Well, the difference here is that the SE had a very high minimum capital. It wasn't, in any way designed for startups and scale-ups. It was relatively complex, and this is something that is certainly designed with startups and scale-ups in mind. So is a completely different entity. Okay,
very good. Joachim.
Maybe one addition about companies that would choose it or not choose it. I mean, a big advantage here is, but obviously that's intentional, to grow quickly across the EU, and that's not necessarily the intention of everyone. I mean, you may have businesses that are strictly local, nearly by definition or by business. On the other hand, if you have something that is, well, if it's software, if it's AI, for example, it's both not country specific and it often has a high need of capital. So also a high need for growing a market quickly. So there is this concept of born internationals for startups, and not everyone is that, but some are, and these urgently need that. So that's one reason, and for those it's particularly important. So it's high fixed cost to set up and then grow, and not being specific to one country, which is, again, well, it's probably not 100%. I totally agree with Kevin. Another point, we have talked about tax regulation, also complementarily needing some harmonization. Then we haven't mentioned, I think, the savings and investment union. This is also in the wings, and let's hope there's also some movement. That would be a wonderful complement to the thing we're talking about here, to the EU Inc.
Yes, absolutely agree there. So we have 6 minutes to go. One more from Monica. Clear and consistent technology. A common EU-wide definition of SMEs and what constitutes a startup is mandatory. Vasco, do you agree with this, or do you think we're kind of okay there?
Well, we have now this new set of definitions, right? As it was mentioned by I think Irene and also Kevin. There's a lot for a long time ongoing discussions, especially at the national level, whether there's a need for definitions or not. And I think because also, of course, the practice differs from member states. A few member states have legal definitions of startups, others only have them for statistical purposes. I think it's very useful to have definitions, but it will all depend how they're used, right? Because, of course, in the case of EU Inc. specifically, I think the definitions are more there to to create certain carve-outs or certain specific regimes within the regime. I think Kevin mentioned the specific case of insolvency. And here I have to say that for us in the startup community, we have wished it would be for startups and scale-ups, but then probably the discussion with member states would be much harder, but we still stand by our initial position. But indeed, let's see how it's used. If we'll have, let's say, in the future, a specific regulation EU or specific programs that are intended, for example, for deep tech, right, which is a really important sector in our community, maybe the definition that is on the table, it's not sufficient when it comes, for example, to the 10-year age of the company. Maybe we need to enlarge it. So it will also depend how the Commission, in the long run, taking this as a basis, will adapt these definitions to the specific programs and initiatives. So overall, positive, but then it will all come down to its application. I think in the case of EU Inc., it's not where it's most necessary, probably. Apart from these, very exceptions that can be introduced in the regime.
Okay, very good. We are coming to the close of today's webinar, and there are still lots of questions, but I think that we've done a good job of covering a lot of ground in this webinar. And Kevin, I guess you're getting a lot of practice in fielding questions like this. So thanks for all of the comprehensive answers. Thanks to all of the other panelists as well for contributing. And maybe to conclude, I have perhaps already revealed my bias in this discussion. I think that we should all get behind this. The private sector associations, startup associations, innovation consultants associations. Kevin, how can we get behind this? How can we help to make sure that this thing becomes a reality as quickly as possible?
Paul, we need to, I suppose, engage the founder community with the ministers, the relevant ministers, the relevant decision makers in each member state, and ensure that they fully understand, and I know they do, but they hear it loud and clear again, that this is something that we need because it'll practically make a difference to companies. It'll help. We'll have more companies, but we'll have more companies scaling. And that was the point that was made, I think, very well earlier. We don't so much have a problem with startups. We have a problem with getting through the next phase. And this is a tool to enable that. And we need to get the first cab off the rank as soon as possible for EU Inc.
And I have to say, my sense from this discussion is that overall there is consensus on that, and that's not often the case when we're discussing EU regulations in these type of forums. So that's worth mentioning as well. And I would like to thank everybody who participated in the audience, people who are asking questions, and to thank our panelists, Joachim, Vasco, Irene, and Kevin. Stay tuned. I think we might need a follow-up webinar on this as well. But like I said, we did well in this discussion today, so I really appreciate the discussion. Stay tuned for more. Thank you very much. And